after speaking to 135 women, which for some people isn't a lot,
You know,
to me,
it's
it's a heck of a lot. As I said, my mantra is persevere, don't just survive. Have a purpose, and the purpose doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be smile, look in that mirror in the morning. And many people have said that, but it's so true.
Sylvia and me.
Sylvia and
Sylvia
me.
and me. Sylvia and
Sylvia.
me.
Sylvia and me.
Sylvia and me. Sylvia and me.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Beckerman, host of the podcast series Sylvia and Me, conversations with extraordinary, inspiring women.
Hi, everybody. This is author Wendy Walker, and I am co-hosting the podcast Sylvia and Me with the podcaster herself, Sylvia Beckerman.
Wendy, thank you so much for doing this. You have been a guest several times, not only on the podcast, but when I was doing events at Après. And I've been told it's 3 years. It's coming up on the 3-year anniversary of the podcast, that I need to flip it around and sit in the hot seat and actually have the questions. People have asked about me. So we'll see where we go with this. And I thank you for doing this. It should be fun.
Oh, it is my pleasure to finally be able to interview you and celebrate you and all of the work that you have done promoting and empowering women. So you, just for those who don't know about Sylvia, because she's been in the other seat and not the hot seat, she is a founder and CEO. She is a women's empowerment advocate. She's an entrepreneur, and she is a podcaster with her podcast, Sylvia and Me. And we're going to hear towards the end what she's going to be up to next. But these are incredible accomplishments. And they all came après a former life. So I want to start by digging into life before all of these wonderful accomplishments, and your early journey that led you to them, starting with just your childhood. Like where did all of this wisdom and knowledge and the ability to change and adapt come from?
Well, I guess I have to say I'm the oldest of 5. And back in the 50s, families really didn't have large families like that. My mother was 20 when she had me, and by the time she was 28, she had 5 children. In fact, my brother and sister are 11 months apart.
Wow.
Yeah. Somebody told her how not to get pregnant, and that just didn't work. And so I guess, as a child, I kept myself a lot. And being the oldest, of course, back then it was $1 to get into the movie theater. And I was the one who, babysat and watched and so on and so forth. But I think watching my mother raise 5 children, and then at the age in her early 40s, go to college, because when she was younger, she was not able to go to college, and within 8 years, get her PhD from Columbia. So I think that had a lot to do with it. My father he owned a dry cleaning store. He worked 6 days a week. And Sundays was, family days, whether we went to see my grandparents in Queens or we went to see my mother's mom in New Haven. So that's the kind of, a brief childhood. I don't know whether that gave me, it gave me my love of movies and reading, because I was very much a very, very shy child, teenager.
Wow,
So,
that's hard to believe because everything you've done has been so outgoing. And so your mother, I mean, did you learn from example, from what she did, or did she give you specific advice that you've held on to throughout the years?
it
What was
wasn't
the source of her influence, do you think?
well, I think her influence was one of the main things. She didn't let anything stop her. If she didn't know how to do anything, something, she went ahead and learned it so she'd be perfect at it. And hearing stories when she was in hospice from women who came up and told stories about how they would call her up and say, Anita, I really want to go for my master's, or I really want to do this. And she'd say, what's stopping you? And they'd go, oh, I'm 60 or whatever. My mother would, she never cursed, but she'd basically say, get off the phone now and go do it. And some of these women had huge accomplishments. So it was that. And it was also my father, who, as I said, worked very hard in a business he did not like, but he had a family to support. And one of the things that I always came away from him was, especially as a business person, one, you never flaunt anything in front of your employees, and the other, the customer's always right. Fix it in the background, and I've used that example a lot of times when I've gone to places where they will start arguing with me when I say, "This came cold and it's supposed to be hot." So, it's basically but I've always said my mother's a huge influence in seeing what a woman could do, because she was told when she went to apply for the the PhD program, that she was too old. She's never going to do it. She's a woman. And no, she didn't pass the first time, but the second time, with flying colors, and it was great. So I have that example there, and I think that's always stuck with me.
And so where did you go from there? Where did you go to college? What was your first job? What were your dreams and ambitions when you were, coming of age?
Well, actually, as I said, I've watched a lot of movies, and one of my favorite movies, Anne Margaret played a buyer in a clothing store. And before that, I wanted to be a stewardess, but I was too short and too heavy. So that was never, because, back in the day, you had to be a certain height, a certain weight. So my second choice was, I saw the movie, Anne Margaret, she was a buyer, and so on and so forth. So I did get a job in the garment center years ago, working in gimbals. And it didn't go as well as I thought it would. um, I had to go up and basically go to HR and announce that my boss was a liar. And yeah, he tried saying that I wasn't in a particular place monitoring the phones when I was supposed to. And it started where, you had to stand up for yourself. And in
Yeah.
business, I always was able to stand up for myself because I just didn't understand how not to. So I
Mhm.
went to college in Israel. I actually went to the Hebrew University. I spent about 2.5 years there, and it was a great experience. Again, very, very introverted, very shy. Was with a whole group of Americans, juniors and seniors. I was a freshman.
Mhm.
And then I came back and started working, and it just kind of morphed from there. I've lived in Israel, I've lived in California, I've lived in Denver, New York. Now I seem to be in Connecticut, and
And
I don't think I'm moving.
what were you doing? So did you stay in retail? What was your next act
M-
after
My,
college?
well, I was in not retail, wholesale for quite some time. And from there I got married at I guess I was 32. I was right before I was 32, I got married. I was working in Queens for a telecommunications company before the internet and everything.
Mhm.
Got pregnant and had my son 2 months early.
Wow.
So it was a question of, I didn't go on a maternity leave. I just went out, and um, I stayed at home for as long as I could, which was about 12, 16 months. And we were living in Queens at that time. But again, it was, they don't give us, you're a mom, you're a single mom, and they don't give us a manual on how to raise children. So
Well, that's
my
true.
my support system was my young cousin who lived across the street from me in Queens. She was about 14 at the time, and I'd call her up and say, "Hey, Lou, I'm supposed to give him real food now. Come over. Let's do this together." Um, and that went on for about, let's say, 4 years. We moved to Denver. I gave birth to my second son, and then
And
moved on from there.
and so you were a working mom for many years,
Yeah.
and that divorce, I mean, that marriage ended in divorce.
Yes.
After how old were your boys when that happened?
When I decided, we were living in Denver, the boys were 4 and 18 months, and Denver, back in the '80s, was a dead town. Everyone had left. Financial market and so on was just awful. And I knew that I could get a job. I had a job the minute I landed in New York. I knew I could get a job, and I needed to support the family. And so I took the 2 boys, a couple of suitcases, $200, and my mother said I could stay with them for 2 weeks or so. Wound up staying with them for about 8 months because they were selling the house, and I was gonna the business I wound up working at, wound up moving to Connecticut. And then somehow I fell into insurance for over 20 some odd years.
Wow. And so you ended up in Connecticut and then working in insurance
Yes.
and raising your boys as a single mom.
Yeah.
And then you got remarried. And how did that come about and what was that experience like?
Well, there was a 16-year window
Wow.
between marriages. When I first left the boy's father back in '88, it took me 2 years to find a state to get divorced in. I
Oh
was
my
living in
gosh.
Connecticut. He had never lived in Connecticut. When I was living in New York at my parents', New York at that time was a state where you needed a reason, and none of the reasons would hold up. So I moved to Connecticut, and Connecticut had no jurisdiction over him. He was back in Denver. And these are things that I wish I had known back then, but you don't know everything, and you just move forward without trying to figure anything out.
So
It's just
how long did it take you to get divorced? It's so
two
because
years.
I was a divorce lawyer, so I'm this is all.
I had to find a state where I could get divorced in, so I
And what
wound up going back to Colorado. I hired an attorney that I knew had just graduated because there wasn't anything other than the boys. I got full custody of the boys and moved back to, flew back to Connecticut. And, it was back in the day where there were all these things about, oh, they're going to have to pay you child support. You'll have no problem. They'll take it out of their pay. It was all what I would call a boomermizer. It just wasn't so. And I just knew it was my job to take care of them. And we
Wow.
lived in Ridgefield for 6 years. We lived in Wilton before that. And then I finally bought a house in Stamford. But from the age of 4 and 18 months until they finally, let's say 2009, I think, when I was actually let up, they both had actually moved out, and the dog was gone too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, that just I can't imagine how you were able to do that without, any financial support or hands-on support from their father. I mean, I'm a single mom, but I, had both of those things in spades from, my kid's dad. So that must have really changed your mindset or your perspective, having grown up with sort of two parents who it sounds like really had each other's backs and worked together to, to raise 5 kids. And then there you were without, any support at all. Did that change how you viewed your role as a woman, or the opportunities for women or life? Did it make you pessimistic? I think for a lot of people that would have really, sort of beaten them down and about life, and about the, just the system, and the inability to get child support and all of that.
I just moved forward. I couldn't think about it. I didn't know any different. I thought it was just absurd. I learned that you had to be an advocate for yourself. My children, they were fine in school, but I realized that because they didn't go to school in torn clothes, they didn't, they were well behaved, they could have slipped through the system. Um, and you just really have to be an advocate. And I didn't sit back and say, woe is me, because I didn't know woe is me. This
Mm,
was life. I had made the decision to leave because I knew it was the best thing for my family. Um, and so I didn't have the time to sit back and go, wow, this is tough, or wow, what am I doing? Um, and there were a couple of things when I first moved to Connecticut. I had put an ad in for oh man, there was, I forget the name right now. The name just slipped out of my mind, of the 2 women, Susan St. James and the woman from SNL, Kate and Ally. I put an ad
oh,
in for Kate and Ally, single mom looking for same, to share, a house, an apartment or something, and I rented a house, a big house in Wilton, did finally find a roommate with a child, Matt's age, and then decided, a year later, just to move to Ridgefield. But I always made sure there was sort of time for me,
yeah.
um, and that was usually after they went to bed. But my parents brought us up where Saturday was their night, even if they just went out for a cup of coffee or a bite to eat. Now, mind you, I didn't go out, I wasn't dating, but, um, I whatever there was a little bit of time for me. And I
Hmm.
know that a lot of people have said to me, "Well, you didn't have a husband that you had to take care of, in addition to the kids." I didn't even think about that. I
Hmm.
had the children,
Yeah.
and I was both mom and dad to them as best as I could, because you can believe me, I had a nanny before they were, a thing, because I thought a guy could play ball, take him out, ice hockey and the rest of the stuff. So, those were the things that I concentrated on.
Yeah. And did you not date out of, I'm just so curious, because that's a long time not to date, and there are a lot of divorced women, and of course we'll get to Après divorce and life Après, which really focuses on women in these stages of change. And did you make a conscious decision not to date, or was there just no
No,
time?
I'm not saying I didn't date in between, because remember, at that time, you're too young to remember this, but at that time, the AOL chat rooms just came out. The online dating, it really wasn't as explosive. So I'd go on and I'd meet, a couple of people. I'll never forget. One came back for a cup of coffee. The boys, were in their room, let go of the babysitter, and my oldest was going, "Is he still there? Did he leave yet?" And I said to me, because he was looking out for me. And the date says, "Is he always going to do that?" I said, "Does that bother you? If it bothers you, ta-ta." And that was it.
Yeah.
So I'd go, one of the things that happened was it was very difficult as a single divorced woman, mother living in New England, especially the bedroom communities,
Yes.
Wilton, Ridgefield. You are a pariah.
Yeah.
Whether you wanna use the word stigma or whatnot, no matter how many times they might say, "Oh, let's get together." First of all, if you said, "Okay, why don't we get a drink sometime?" I was amazed because their response would be, "I don't drink anymore." Hey, not
Yeah,
even a cup of coffee. But it took me 8 years. It took me when I finally moved to Stanford to make a friend. I used to joke that I knew more people in the cemetery in New Haven dead than I knew alive, and it was true.
I think it's so interesting how, and that is still true today. Um, you know, found I've been divorced for 14 years, and um, definitely found that married women, would see me for maybe a dinner during the week. Usually they would want to have lunch, but that would take away from, my work time. And never on the weekends. The weekends were for their husbands, and that was it. And never an invitation to a dinner party, never an invitation to a
Mhm.
cocktail party. Occasionally, if it coincided with something with the school, or it was, sort of, strange not to include me because of my children and their friendships. But you're not, you're just you whether it's subconscious or not, I do think there is that feeling of, is this somehow contagious? Like, will it infect my marriage? And it's interesting because I've actually had, I had one friend who came in and out of my life, um, and who told me that it was very actually hard for her to be around me after my divorce because her marriage was unhappy. But she did not want to get divorced. She wanted to stick with it, until the kids were out of the house, and that was many years away. And it was hard for her to see me, what she envisioned as, starting this new independent life, even though it was so hard to do that.
It
And
doesn't
there were so many
matter.
challenges. It didn't matter for her. It was something that, that she sort of craved and envied. And I think she did not want that influence in her life, and sort of pulling her in that direction. And so you never know what the reasons are, but
No.
it's absolutely a thing. Like
It
you
is a
said, I
thing.
really think,
It's a
yeah.
perception, whether they're paranoid that their husbands are gonna go after you, whether you're living a life that they think is so great, and a lot of them can't get divorced because they're house rich and cash poor. They're not gonna be able to
Yes.
live the way they're
Yeah.
living. I remember
Or they,
sitting in
yeah.
a pub in Richfield with a friend of mine, and we're sitting there and we're listening to 2 women next to us talking about how abusive one of the husbands are, but is, but she can't leave
Mm,
because where's she
yeah.
gonna go?
Yeah.
And it was mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And
And
then
I
of
saw
course
that. I saw that as a divorce lawyer, when I was practicing. um, Women would come in for a consult, and we would tell them what they were likely to get, and what they would have to live on, and they would, sometimes decide that it was, not so bad, and that they would find a way to manage it. So, that absolutely happens, and especially when women have given up their careers and their economic
yes,
independence, their financial independence. And now, there's a lot of talk about coercive control and new legislation that's been passed in Connecticut, which is, sort of taking a harder look at these situations where men, where women have given up all the financial control, and then they do try to leave because of abuse going on in the home, and they are starved out to the point where the husbands get custody. The husbands can
yes,
stay home and be full-time dads, or hire a whole army of nannies. And during this long litigation, the mom has no access to money. The courts are backed up and slowed down, and it can and they have nowhere to live that can actually, house the number of children they have. And it's really, I mean, it does happen. So, let's transition. This is a great place to transition to your first sort of non-traditional, venture of, Après divorce. So, what what was the pivotal moment where you decided you wanted to, be an entrepreneur and start this organization? And why did you decide to focus on this period of life after divorce?
Well, I've always been an entrepreneur because all the companies I worked for were startups. Um, but I did get married again. I got married right before my 60th birthday back in hmm, 2009, 2010. And that lasted for about 4.5 years. I found out that he was very manipulative, aside from other things. And I it's funny because I wasn't going out to interview attorneys, and I wound up speaking to 7 of them. And the last one I found just got it. He understood. The others were telling me because it was such a short marriage, it was 4.5 years, um, that I would be out because when we got married, I sold my house and I got rid of my house in Stanford and I gave everything to charity. You name it, it went. The whole house went to charity. The whole inside of the house went to charity. And during our marriage, I supported us. And I wound up supporting some of his previous family also. But I found an attorney who got it, who didn't say to me, "You'd be out in 45 days." He said, "How long do you need?" I said, "I need at least a year. Where am I going?" I'm working at that point. I was working part time, a good job part time with a business that was supposed to take off, but never really did. And when I left there, I found an apartment that I just loved. The whole idea of leaving sort of became a freedom for me this time because I didn't have the children. I mean, they were there, but they weren't going to live with me. And I wasn't telling my oldest that the couch was actually a sleeper sofa. Never told him. But I went out and I didn't panic because I knew that Bruce had my back, my attorney. Um, and I found the cutest little basement apartment, and I always used to say it was Jane Fonda, Barefoot in the Park meets Laverne and Shirley. And I made it my own, although I did insist in taking a bed from my ex's house, Joe's house, which he put up a fight for, which is hysterical. That's a story for another day. Um, but I went to went to have a glass of wine and cut a piece of cheese. And I realized that the only knife I had was the knife from my picnic basket. Wonderful wicker that you see in the movies, and you're going to take on this great picnic. And I called up my friend and I said, "Sandra, I've never registered, but we're going to go down to Bed Bath and Beyond. I don't know how to do it, but we're going to register and I'm going to throw a little party for my divorce." It just felt freeing. It felt like I was independent for the first time and I only had myself to account for.
Yeah.
And, it was ironic because my son and now daughter-in-law were registering for their wedding that was taking
Oh,
place that May. And he had done one thing that got me angry. For some people, it would have been devastating. I had an email address, and I know this sounds very petty, but this to me is the whole point. I had an email address that I'd had for since Opt Online ever became Opt Online, so
mhm,
20 years or something. And
mhm.
when I moved in, I paid all the bills, but I never switched the account and added my name. So it turns out he owned my email address and he
Oh,
wouldn't do everything that was needed to release it. It didn't cost any money. It just had to, click something. And that pissed me off. I had another email address because I didn't trust him. So I already had one, but that one was something that I'd had forever. Ticked me off. And for some reason, I started thinking about all the things that when I was living in Connecticut and when I first moved and had the 2 young boys, was going through the divorce, was single, single mom for 18 years, however long. Well, I'm still a single mom.
yeah.
And what if somebody knew something about there must be information that other people have. For me, it wasn't a big deal. I was angry, but for somebody else, it could be devastating. It
Yeah.
could have to do with their work, it have to do with their identity. We can't think that everything is just tiny. So, without even thinking, I went on GoDaddy. Luckily, they didn't have after divorce because I realized Après divorce just sounded so much better. I
Yeah.
took French in elementary school for about 6 years, and my French teacher made me promise never to speak a word of French. Um, but I got the
I was the
name.
same way.
Yeah, I got the name, got the domain. I was working with what people from my other job, called them up, asked them if they could get me a logo. I was in the process of starting another business called Next Chapters, helping women move on. Immediately flipped that to Life of Prey. Um, and held my first, I didn't even know what I was doing, but I held my first event back in June 19th of 2016.
Yeah.
And it was a launch party,
Yep.
and people came up and thanked me.
So great. Yeah.
And, from there, I had events, as you know, because I had you at 2 or 3 of them.
Yep.
They were at different venues. They
Yeah.
were about different things. They never, if there was something that was really heavy, whether it be finance or law or narcissism, there was
Mhm.
always somebody else in there who talked about dating and sex and so
Yeah.
on. Wine and appetizers and just gathering. Sometimes there were 8 people, sometimes there were 30 people.
Yeah.
Um, it all depended. And it was, once a month for about 3 years. And I realized that it was helping me. And it was helping, these women. I'd get emails and thank yous from them. Never selling anything.
Mhm.
And anyone who came, nothing was being sold. They weren't up there, selling whatever they did, because if they were good enough in talking, and some weren't, professionals, they were experts on whether it be dating, y- and your books, whether it be narcissism,
Right.
trauma, dissociation. It
Yeah.
was, the narcissism one was big.
Yeah. That
At
was I
that
remember that
particular
so well.
one, remember I had Angie Atkinson, the queen bee of narcissism, and
Yeah.
there were women there who did not want any pictures, and no pictures were ever taken if people
Yeah.
didn't want, because they were afraid that their spouse might find out. But they
Yeah.
realized that there were other people in the same situation.
Yeah. That's a huge topic, and I think there's so much control that goes on in when there's a narcissist in the mix that and again it's this you know giving a voice and a place to speak with that voice to women that I think was so important for the work that you did. What was the most surprising thing you learned while you were hosting these events and meeting so many women and just diving into really these very substantive issues concerning marriage and divorce and all of that. What was there anything that stands out in your mind?
Well, the funny thing is that I did start as a prey divorce, but it morphed into Life of Prey about a year after, because the women who were coming, some had never been married, some were in relationships, some were divorced, some were widowed. All the topics, really, a lot of them, they either knew someone going through, or they, because finance, as you talked about finance before, one of the topics was, it's polite to ask. You should ask. The women need to ask. We're brought up in thinking that we have certain roles. We nurture, we, work if we need to. They used to call it pocket money back in the 40s and 50s that women were making. And as you said, the role usually is the male takes care of the finances. And, as so many people put their head under the pillow and then all of a sudden get a surprise, whether it be divorce or spousal loss, or, they're living with a partner, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So there was, to me, the surprise was the mix of women and the need for these topics. And I learned a lot from it, and we had a good time doing it. And it was nice to see people who never opened their mouth before just have a discussion across the room, because it was never anything, it was never a lecture. I don't
Mhm.
like lectures. I don't, it was always a conversation, and that's why I've been very specific. It's a conversation.
Yeah. And it was, and people would stay after and form small groups and talk and make friends, and it was, really such an incredible opportunity, I think. As we were saying before, so hard for divorced women to, and widows as well, to just single women, right, who are of a certain age, who, to find friends, especially in communities, like this one, where the majority of people are married, and there's such a focus on couples and being coupled. So I think just that, as well as the information and the empowerment, but just
Just to
have
find someone.
friendship, yes, to find,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, I think it's an amazing thing. So how did you sort of transition into doing a podcast, and where is life après now? Are you still, is it, I know COVID probably was, put a damper on any events, but is there
Well,
anything coming out of that? Anything, will there be something evolving from that in the future?
the funny thing is COVID actually opened up the podcast for me, because people weren't on travel schedules and so on. So I wound up talking to women from all over the world, whether it be England, Yugoslavia, Lithuania. I mean, I would forget to ask the time zone that they were in. And it allowed me to talk to women who I never would have been able to talk to and have a discussion with. I mean, I had Melissa Burton and Anita Diamant on period, end of story, and period poverty. I talked to I talked to, the first one was Candace Leitner, the founder of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I talked to women who had gone through trauma and came out, differently in certain things. Women who had a passion and didn't realize it, or were doing something and had no idea that they were touching so many people. And it wasn't a question, people would say to me, "Well, do you have questions that you're going to, can I prep?" And I'd go, "I don't,
Mm.
because I
Yeah.
never know where the conversation's going to go." If I speak to somebody with a PhD, I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to do this? And we would just talk. I spoke to someone who is a doctor, and her and her, in research, and her thing is, STEM and technology, and I never thought I'd be able to. What am I going to talk about? Well, but we talked about women in that career, and how difficult, and how you just have to push forward. And that's one of my things is, it's not just survival, it's perseverance. You have to, surviving, to me, people have said, "Oh, you're a survivor." What else was I supposed to do? That to me is, you wake up in the morning and you breathe. But to
Right.
persevere, yeah, you have some goal, even if it's just to get up and look at yourself and say, "I'm okay."
Yeah.
It took me over 40 years to find my voice. And each decade later, it I was able to do a little bit more. It wasn't until my 50s that I actually went someplace on my own. I never even went to a coffee shop and had coffee on my own. I never went I told you I was shy. I mean, this has been learned because I'm not afraid anymore. And it took me
What
years.
happened now? How did that come about to lose that fear? And were you even aware that you were afraid? You describe yourself as being shy, but did you see that shyness emanating sort of from, fear, or did you just see it as, an innate personality trait? And then how were you able to sort of overcome it?
I think that, as I said, I'd had a 16-year relationship, on and off relationship between the two marriages, a little bit longer. I'd been beaten down so much, been told, oh, no one, if you do this, no one's gonna like you. If you do that, this is gonna happen, and so on. And one day I was in a market that's no longer there in Norwalk, Connecticut, and I was buying some steak, and I'm not a big cook, and I told the guy how my kids like it, black and Philly something or other, whatever it was, and he knew exactly and told me what to do. And the next week I walked in and he was busy, and somebody else was waiting on me, and he said to his coworker, "Be nice to her. She smiles all the time." And
Aw.
that made such a difference in my outlook. It
Mm.
it it just did, and from there, it just took, it took time. My 60s, even though I had a divorce in the middle of that, each it's been great. It's really it's you wake up and it's today. I can't look at the future because I don't know what's going to happen. I know what I'd like to do, but I'm not afraid of I will not say, "Oh, the 60s are the new 40s, the 70s are the new whatever." I don't believe in that nonsense. I really don't. I like where I am now.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I had a nice party for my 70th. It brought my siblings together and some friends because it was, coming out of lockdown and the pandemic.
Mhm.
It's People have to, especially as women, there's so much we cannot lose the fact that we need to keep using our voice, that we matter,
Yeah.
that we can be strong, and we are stronger together. And yes, there are women who are not nice to other women, but get rid of those. I mean,
Yeah,
seriously.
right.
Um, uh,
And
yeah.
podcast really gave that was really this opportunity to, sort of have a deep dive with women who who had strong voices and had something to say and to share. What was so how the podcast went up for 3 years. Is that
This October, it started October 29th, 2019 was the first one.
okay? So
So,
wow, that's almost exactly 3 years. And in that time, I'm not going to ask you who your favorite guest was because, of course, that would be me. No,
that would
but,
be you.
no, but who I'm very curious, who, which guest surprised you the most?
I'm going to have to go with my last one, only because of her courage and selflessness. Tova Friedman, who, will be coming out, as we're talking the middle of October. This is October 20th or something or other. Who knows? She is one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz, and her story is amazing. So what surprised me there was the fact that this is a woman who not only tells the story, but is also wants us not only to remember, but to notice signs and also see the strength that people don't realize that's inside.
Mm.
So to me, that is one of the most powerful. One of the most surprising ones was a woman who owns Canty Boots, Canty, Nikki Edmondson, who really, I'd seen something over a year ago about these cowboy boots, the short boots that she was making for women. And, we started talking, and she really didn't realize what she was doing. And what she was doing was people would send her a boot that fit, their own boot, and then send her scraps of fabric or some from memories from maybe their grandparents or their parents or somebody they
Oh,
knew and put it on. And she was making history, wearable history for these people,
wow.
getting a story together. So that kind of surprised me. Um, and as you said, you're my favorite. But, I ran the gamut, whether we
Yeah.
talked about period poverty, race relations, interracial marriage, sex, um, activism, being active at any age. I've just have found it. Everyone uses the word journey, chapter, lives. If I have any more journeys or chapters, but I intend to have many, many more.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and my
let's talk about that. What's coming up? What's on the horizon for you, and where are you at in your life now, other than being obviously very knowledgeable and wise and optimistic, but how do you see, your future, and what things are on your bucket list for yourself?
well, my bucket list for myself right now is to spend as much time with my grandson as possible. I have an 11-month-old grandson, Bryson Gray Paul, of course, three first names. Um, and really, I've waited a long time to have a grandchild. I'm going to really embrace that. And as far as what else I'm going to do, everyone writes a book. Not everyone writes thrillers the way you do, but I do need to tell the stories of these women who allowed their voices to be heard. And some of them are not more amazing than others, but different.
Hmm.
And I think it really needs to be out there. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. I won't say I'll never do another podcast. I have a bad habit of going, "Oh my, this is a great story." Um, and they are, and they're relevant because we're relevant, and we need to keep that.
Yeah.
So I intend to keep my voice going because it's really hard to keep me quiet, and make sure that especially young people and people as we get older, not old, we don't have to get old, but we do get older,
Yeah.
and embrace it. Don't
Yeah.
look for anything else. Embrace it. Have fun with it,
Yeah.
and just keep using our voices, especially now, especially with what's
Oh,
going
yes.
on.
Especially with what's going on. Exactly. It's I was going to ask you about that, doing this podcast about empowering women at a time when, one might argue that we have seen some major setbacks, for women's rights and independence and freedom. It's been, obviously very challenging, and a reminder, I think, that we can't take anything, for granted. And it's so interesting because I'm in my 50s, and people sometimes, will ask a question during an interview, um, if there's anything I would tell my younger self, or anything that I know now that I wish I'd known when I was younger. And it's such a difficult question, because I don't know that the things we have attained in terms of knowledge and experience can be absorbed or understood without having the experiences that led to them, if that makes sense.
It
And
does.
yet, I feel as though there is such value in mentoring and in giving messages to women. So what advice would you give to, to younger women who have yet to sort of go through these life-changing journeys, mini journeys throughout the decades, to come to their own realizations? What would you tell them, and what would you want them to know?
I would tell them to look in the mirror and have confidence in themselves, that they matter. There's a world that's open. Open your eyes, open your ears, and if you have something to say it. Don't be afraid, because fear will stop us from moving forward. Confidence and self-esteem, which for so many, especially in certain areas, is so difficult.
Yeah.
But my thing is, I want to educate young women in the fact that the rights that we have now as women weren't always there. And now they're seeing this with the Dobbs decision,
Mhm.
but there are other things that are up there also. And
Yes.
you can't blame young women for not understanding, because they grew up with it. I mean,
Yes.
women in their 30s, women in their 40s, 50 years ago it sounds like a long time, but for women in their 30s, it was only 15 years before they were born.
Yeah. No,
Well,
that's right.
put it that way, it's a short period of time. Women weren't always able to vote. Women weren't able to get a credit card on their own. Women couldn't buy a house. I remember all the challenges I had in renting. I had to have, a guy vouch for me. I always, was turned down at the beginning, and then they'd come running back, because that wonderful family that they thought was going didn't have the credit, didn't have the this, didn't have the that, and they'd beg me to come back. So, to young women out there, just open your ears, have confidence, and keep moving forward. Use your voice. Y- find, when I say use your voice, I'm afraid of some of the people that are out there. It's a difficult thing these days.
Some of you use your voice. The rest of you, shh.
But we can't go backwards.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
cannot go backwards. No matter what you think, we need to take charge of our own lives, and we can do it. We
Yeah.
really can.
Yeah. I think that's such a great message. And I think that um it's something that I wish someone had said to me when I was younger, and not just in a sort of general way, but with, with specific knowledge and with specific information. And that's why I think, the podcast that you've been hosting all these years, and Life Après, and all of those are um, are really specific, concrete ways of showing how to use a voice, and giving examples of here is a woman who used her voice to be a doctor. Here is one who's a lawyer. Here is one who is an advocate, or here's one who's just raised her children, and now speaks about that. And I think it's really such an important message, but also the work you've done to stand behind it and show what that actually looks like in practice has been really important and meaningful. And I thank you for doing it on behalf of all of us who find ourselves going through change. So I don't know, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up? Any like mantras, or anything, any other things you're looking forward to, things we should be watching out for, you know and
Well,
other Other than spending time with your grandson, is there anything we should be know that's coming, and this wonderful book that hopefully will be on the horizon?
Well, the book is going to be on the horizon because I will have time. I will be putting up, the podcasts. The good thing about a podcast is it lives forever.
Mhm.
And after speaking to 135 women, which for some people isn't a lot,
You know,
to me,
it's
it's a heck of a lot. As I said, my mantra is persevere, don't just survive. Have a purpose, and the purpose doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be smile, look in that mirror in the morning. And many people have said that, but it's so true. Um, I want to really take this opportunity also to thank uh, not only the women who have been guests, but all the women who have listened. And I know I love getting the emails and texts from so many women um, thanking me. And I didn't go out there to specifically do anything, but give a voice to some people. So that's the only, that's my mantra. Um, Everyone stay safe, please stay healthy, and use your voice. Have the confidence that it really, really matters. Wendy, I wanna thank you so much for doing this. I mean,
oh,
you've
it's
given a
my
voice to
pleasure.
women in your books, so that's why we get along so well. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and all the best to you in the years to come.
Thanks.
You can find us on all of your popular podcast platforms. And of course, our website, sylviame.com. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned.